Fantasy is supposed to be escapism, castles in the clouds, chosen heroes, clean battles between good and evil. But some filmmakers took that mythology and dragged it somewhere far darker. They filled their worlds with blood, sexuality, religious fury, psychological horror, and violence so raw it rattled studios and audiences alike. These weren't safe fairy tales built for toy shelves. They were nightmares dressed in medieval armor and sorcery. Executives worried about marketability. Censors hesitated. Test audiences walked out. Yet these films survived because they refused to soften their edges. They proved fantasy could be adult, confrontational, and deeply unsettling, without losing its sense of mythic scale. Some became cult legends. Others nearly destroyed careers. All of them pushed the genre into dangerous territory that Hollywood rarely dares to revisit. These are the most extreme R-rated fantasy films that shocked audiences and studios and reshaped dark fantasy history forever.
Excalibur, 1981. Long before sanitized sword and sorcery blockbusters dominated multiplexes, Excalibur plunged Arthurian legend into mud, blood, and erotic mysticism. Directed by John Boorman, the film embraced brutality and operatic excess. Armor clashes feel heavy and violent. Sexual politics drive the narrative as much as destiny. Helen Mirren's Morgana is sensual and dangerous, not a cartoon villain. The violence earned it an R rating, and studios were wary of its unapologetic intensity. Boorman leaned into myth rather than realism, creating a fever-dream medieval world soaked in green light and Wagnerian thunder. Audiences expecting a family-friendly Camelot were confronted with betrayal, incestuous undertones, and raw ambition. It was fantasy without innocence. While it later influenced countless filmmakers, at the time its tone felt alien and risky. Excalibur proved that myth could be savage, spiritual, and adult without compromise.
The Witch, 2015. Marketing suggested a supernatural thriller. What viewers experienced was suffocating Puritan dread. Directed by Robert Eggers, The Witch strips fantasy down to paranoia and religious extremism. Dialogue drawn from historical records gives it unsettling authenticity. The horror unfolds slowly, without jump-scare relief. Studios initially questioned its archaic language and bleak tone. The violence is sparse but deeply disturbing, culminating in imagery that feels blasphemous and triumphant at once. Anya Taylor-Joy's breakout performance anchors the film's descent into hysteria. Rather than monsters attacking from the outside, the terror grows within a fractured family. Its R rating reflects psychological cruelty as much as physical violence. The Witch demonstrated that audiences would embrace oppressive, slow-burn fantasy horror. But its uncompromising tone remains rare in mainstream studio fantasy production.
Pan's Labyrinth, 2006. When audiences heard the word fairy tale, they didn't expect crushed skulls and fascist brutality. Directed by Guillermo del Toro, Pan's Labyrinth merges Franco-era Spain with grotesque fantasy creatures. The Pale Man sequence alone unsettled viewers worldwide. Though subtitled and visually poetic, the violence is unflinching. Studios questioned whether dark fantasy with child protagonists could survive an R rating. Del Toro refused to tone down its brutality, insisting that innocence and horror coexist. The film juxtaposes magical quests with the real-world cruelty of authoritarianism. Audiences were stunned by its emotional weight and moral ambiguity. Rather than comforting escapism, it delivers sacrifice and ambiguity. Its success proved adult fantasy could be artful and commercially viable. But it remains an exception rather than the rule in Hollywood's risk-averse fantasy landscape. Conan the Barbarian, 1982. Before comic book universes redefined heroism, Conan the Barbarian delivered muscle-bound mythology soaked in blood. Directed by John Milius and starring Arnold Schwarzenegger, the film reveled in brutality and pagan mysticism. Heads roll. Cult rituals dominate the screen. The tone is solemn rather than playful. Studios feared its nihilistic violence would limit appeal, yet it became a cult success. The film treats fantasy as ancient legend rather than light adventure. Its operatic score contrasts sharply with savage imagery.
Rather than a quippy hero, Conan is stoic and relentless. The R rating allowed violence rarely seen in big-budget fantasy at the time. It shocked audiences expecting escapist fun and instead delivered mythic fatalism. Conan proved that fantasy epics could succeed without softening their barbaric edges.
Legend, 1985. On the surface, Legend appears whimsical. Beneath the glitter lies sensual darkness. Directed by Ridley Scott, the film features a terrifying performance by Tim Curry as the Lord of Darkness. His towering red demon became iconic. The film's tone blends fairy tale romance with satanic imagery. Studio interference led to multiple cuts and altered soundtracks to make it more accessible. Its darker original vision unsettled executives concerned about commercial viability. While not as violent as others on this list, its erotic undertones and demonic symbolism shocked audiences expecting family fantasy. Legend's troubled production history reflects Hollywood's discomfort with overtly dark mythic storytelling. It remains visually stunning and tonally daring. Legend, 1985. On the surface, Legend appears whimsical. Beneath the glitter lies sensual darkness. Directed by Ridley Scott, the film features a terrifying performance by Tim Curry as the Lord of Darkness. His towering red demon became iconic. The film's tone blends fairy tale romance with satanic imagery. Studio interference led to multiple cuts and altered soundtracks to make it more accessible. Its darker original vision unsettled executives concerned about commercial viability. While not as violent as others on this list, its erotic undertones and demonic symbolism shocked audiences expecting family fantasy. Legend's troubled production history reflects Hollywood's discomfort with overtly dark mythic storytelling. It remains visually stunning and tonally daring.
The City of Lost Children, 1995. French dark fantasy rarely crossed into American theaters, especially at this level of surrealism. Directed by Marc Caro and Jean-Pierre Jeunet, The City of Lost Children constructs a nightmare steampunk world where children are kidnapped for their dreams. Its grotesque production design feels like a twisted storybook. Violence and disturbing imagery earned it restricted exposure in the United States. Studios struggled to market its bizarre tone. Ron Perlman's presence helped attract attention, but the film's European eccentricity limited mainstream reach. Rather than clear moral lessons, it offers melancholy and surreal menace. Its R rating reinforced its adult orientation, keeping younger fantasy audiences away. The film remains a cult artifact, admired for visual ambition, yet rarely replicated by major American studios wary of its strangeness.
Hellboy, 2004. Comic adaptations usually chase broad appeal. Hellboy leaned into demonic folklore and Lovecraftian horror. Directed by Guillermo del Toro and starring Ron Perlman, the film balanced dark humor with apocalyptic imagery. Studios debated whether its monster-heavy aesthetic would alienate audiences. Its R-rated violence and occult themes distinguished it from lighter superhero fare. Del Toro embraced practical effects, creating tactile creatures that felt genuinely grotesque. Rather than sanitize the source material, he honored its pulp darkness. The film shocked viewers accustomed to PG-13 comic films. Although it achieved moderate success, its tone prevented it from becoming a mainstream franchise powerhouse. Hellboy proved that comic fantasy could be gothic and adult, yet Hollywood has rarely repeated that risk at similar scale.
The Green Knight, 2021. Arthurian legend returned with stark minimalism in The Green Knight. Directed by David Lowery, the film embraces ambiguity and existential dread. Dev Patel's Sir Gawain is flawed and uncertain, not heroic. The violence is sudden and disquieting. Sexual imagery and spiritual unease earned its R rating. Studios questioned its slow pacing and surreal tone. Rather than clear adventure beats, it delivers meditation on mortality and honor. The film resists conventional fantasy structure, leaving interpretations open. Its austere visuals and haunting score create atmosphere rather than spectacle. The Green Knight proved modern audiences could accept art house fantasy, but its box office performance reinforced Hollywood's hesitation towards similarly cerebral projects.
Bram Stoker's Dracula, 1992. Vampire stories often romanticize immortality. Bram Stoker's Dracula turned it operatic and erotic. Directed by Francis Ford Coppola, the film embraces gothic excess. Blood flows freely. Sexual desire drives the horror. Practical effects and theatrical performances heighten its feverish tone. Studios were nervous about its explicit sensuality and stylized violence. Gary Oldman's Dracula shifts between monstrous and seductive. The R rating allowed Coppola to explore lust and damnation without restraint. While it achieved success, its Baroque intensity shocked mainstream audiences expecting conventional horror. The film stands as one of the boldest studio-backed dark fantasies ever released.
Dark fantasy thrives in risk. It demands discomfort. These films shattered the illusion that fantasy must be safe or sanitized. They blended myth with sexuality, faith with violence, beauty with decay. Some nearly collapsed under censorship. Others survived because visionary directors refused compromise. What unites them is courage. Courage to embrace the grotesque. Courage to treat myth as something dangerous rather than decorative. Hollywood occasionally flirts with darkness, but rarely commits to it fully. These films did. And in doing so, they expanded the boundaries of what fantasy cinema could become for adult audiences worldwide.